Alright everyone, today we're going to talk about monitor application usage and performance. We're going to delve in to see how we do this on Azure using Application Insights and also how we use App Center to do tracking events and monitoring user performance, user sessions and any other metrics involved in sort of a mobile application level. Okay, so looking at the agenda, this is kind of what we're going to go through. We're going to start off and talk about Application Insights. Then we're going to talk about the analytics section to Application Insights. We're going to look at the Telemetry Client of Application Insights, which is used for monitoring events, exceptions, tracking, metrics, and all these other sections that feed into the Application Insights on the Azure portal. Then we're going to jump into App Center, talk about the analytics section and crashes. So what is application monitoring? Well, application monitoring is any sort of measure we can take to check about our performance and exactly how your user is using an application. We usually do this through many ways. There's usually libraries available that sync into, say, Application Insights or other frameworks which are used to track these metrics. But the main idea is we want to be able to monitor the application performance and make sure it's performing well, and also detect any failures or exceptions that do occur and find out quickly where these happen exactly inside your application and get straight to the bottom of it and fix the problem. So application usage is a very, very cool way of monitoring how users are interacting with the application. So we can track things like page views, we can track events by, say, how many times a user clicks a certain button on a particular page and monitor exactly how they interact with each page of your application. So it's a good way to determine user behavior of how they're interacting with your user interface. So let's talk about Application Insights. Application Insights is a service which we can set up on Azure. The idea is Application Insights is integrated into a mobile or web application and other services hosted on Azure to basically monitor the performance of your service or application, track any issues or exceptions that do occur, and help find and diagnose these root causes of your application or the problems that do arise. So the way this is done is we have what's called telemetry. Telemetry is collected at any area of an application or service that we want to attach Application Insights to or integrate into. So normally Application Insights, we can monitor telemetry at the server level, through middleware, web service level, browser level, almost any section of your application. We can use Application Insights to track exactly how these areas are performing. And this data then is sent to the cloud where it is stored and processed, and we can also use the analytics section, which I'll get to in a minute, to query this data and where it is stored. So if I want to see how many web requests have occurred on a certain page, I can use querying to basically pull this data out and read response times and any other data that you would track alongside these metrics put into the data store of Application Insights. And again, we can use this data to monitor issues, user performance, and track any exceptions that do occur. So here's a list and a bit of a breakdown of what Application Insights can monitor. We've got request rates, response times, failure rates, dependency rates, response times, failure rates, exceptions, page views, low performance, user sessions, diagnostics, custom events and metrics, which is extremely useful as we can basically set up exactly how we want to track anywhere inside an application or service. Now let's get to a demo of how we set up Application Insights with a Functions app. Now what we're going to do is we're going to first name the Functions app and call it Test Monitor. Oh, that's not available. Let's do 1, 2, 3 at the end. Great. Now we're going to assign it to a subscription, create a new resource group, select our operating system which we want to host it on, set the consumption plan. I'm just going to set it to a consumption plan, and I'm also going to set the location. So because I'm in Australia, I'm going to put it in East Australia. And we can also then assign storage to the Functions app. And then this is where we set up application insights at the very bottom. We simply click on. Specify the location. Because it's not available in Australia East, I'm going to have to assign it to East US. And pin it to the dashboard and click Create. Now what that's going to do is that's going to set up a Functions app and assign a new application insights object to that Functions app. So when that finishes deploying, we will be able to then access the application insights object tied to this Functions app. Excellent. As we can see here now, the deployment has succeeded. And if I then check the resource group, I'll have a new resource group which we specified in that setup called Test Monitor 123. And inside this resource group, we should have a Functions app and an Application Insights object, service, and also the storage account item. So that's the storage account which is tied into the Application Insights data store. So now let's click on the Test Monitor 123 Application Insights object. And we can then simply start looking straight into telemetry. So when I then specify functions inside the Functions app, I can then tie it straight into this Application Insights object here. And I can start seeing HTTP requests and server requests going into the Functions app, and that data will be stored inside here. Now what you're seeing here is a web app application insight service set up to track event metrics. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down on the left-hand panel and go to the usage area. And what's happening here is this is a breakdown of all the metrics that have been taken in across users, sessions, events, funnels, and other different areas where the metrics are stored in tables in the data store. So I'm going to jump into the events section here. And let's have a look at some of the custom events that were tracked for this mobile application that was tracking telemetry data in an Azure Functions service. Now in the last 24 hours, I can't see any activity. But let's go ahead and change the duration to the last 14 days. And there we go. Now we're getting some data back. So we've got 493 events and a breakdown in a bar chart across different days. And we can see the amount of events that do occur on a day-by-day basis. And we can choose to change this to a line, area graph. We can even choose to export this stuff out. So, and then we can scroll down and we can have a look at the top 5 events that have happened in that duration period that I set at the top. And it's a complete breakdown of the events tracking inside the mobile application. So let's have a look at querying with analytics. So basically analytics is the ability to query your raw data taken in from Application Insights. It uses a special query language to retrieve whatever data we want inside our data store of Application Insights. So let's take a quick look and see how that works. So here is where we start performing queries on our raw data that is stored in the data store of Application Insights. So on the left here, these are basically tables like an SQL database which contain columns. So inside these columns, this is all the information recorded for a single telemetry client track request committed inside the application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to query the requests table like so, where the timestamp is less than 1 day old. And I'm going to click go. Now what that's going to do is that's going to retrieve all the data inside the requests table where the timestamp is less than a day old. And boom, there we go. So you can see here for every single one of these requests, this is basically a HTTP request that every single time the functions of this application, as you can see here in the name column, these are mapped to functions for this mobile application. So every single time one of those functions is called, we're actually using the telemetry client to track that HTTP request. And this is where we can get into some really cool finer details of what's happening. So we get the timestamp of when it occurred, an ID which is set by the data store automatically, so we get basically independently assigned items inside the database. We can see it's true, the result code, HTTP status code, how long the duration was for this HTTP request, and then we can scroll over and see things like this, like city, geo-region, client IP. You can get into some really cool finer details of what is happening with every single HTTP request. And what's really cool here is I'm actually mapping these to functions inside a function service, which is on the back end of this mobile application. So we get full integration there with functions on serverless inside Application Insights. Now let's have a look at the Telemetry Client object. So this is basically a class which is included inside the library integrated in with Visual Basic, C#, Java, or Node.js. So the Telemetry Client object is what's used to feed the data in from either tracking events, metrics, exceptions. All that data is fed through the Telemetry Client back up into Application Insights on Azure. So we use this object to do all tracking of metrics inside an application. Now let's have a look at the first section, which is tracking events. So we can insert track event calls to basically count various different events. How often you choose a particular feature, or maybe making particular types of mistakes. So we can actually specify the item that we're tracking, which is in this case, win game. And you will see telemetry data collected from this event fed back up to Application Insights. We can also do things like tracking metrics, where I might want to track particular, like say, charting metrics, and I can then also tie these into pie graphs, bar graphs back in Application Insights. So I could monitor, for example, queue lengths at regular intervals to make sure that a queue is inflating exactly how I want based upon data sets put into the queue. So we can do many types of measurements like this and track it all the way back into Application Insights from start to finish. This feature is really cool. We can actually track page views. So inside a web page app, for example, we can get specific telemetry sent by default when each screen or page is loaded. Now we also have operation context. So with telemetry items, sometimes we might want to start an operation when the beginning of a section of code begins. So say for example I was calling a HTTP request to call some code in a function. I can call start operation at the start of that function, wait until all that code is run sequentially, then call stop operation at the end, all through the telemetry client, and then it will store all that data from how long that HTTP request has taken to finish. That will be stored all the way back to Application Insights, and I can see exactly what did occur in that section of code. So here's an example of what an operation context tracking looks like. So we make sure that we tie everything inside the using statements, so everything is correctly disposed when we finish this operation tracking. So the first thing we do is we can actually call start operation. Then we can call track trace at different sections of code, so we get that particular point in code, what exactly is occurring. We can then call response code specifically to the operation, and then we can finish and call stop operation and make sure that operation completes. Once that operation completes, the data will be then sent within seconds back up to application insights. So only when we dispose that operation, the telemetry is sent. So inside that using statement, which we saw on the previous page, what I would recommend doing is wrapping the entire section of code in a try-catch block, or only where possible exceptions may occur. So inside, while we're tracking an operation, we can then also track exceptions that do occur inside a section of code. So when we wrap that section of code in a try-catch block, when an exception does fire, we call the track exception function on the telemetry client, and that exception data will be fed straight back into application insights. So let's look now at a demo where we're going to set up application insights with a web application. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click create. And we're going to create a new web application and set up some application insights to start tracking any HTTP telemetry that does occur on the web application. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to call this test web monitor, and hopefully this name is available. Yes, it is. Specify the subscription, a new resource group, the operating system. We also have to specify app service plans that map to this web app, and we're also going to switch on application insights and specify the location where this is going to be set up. In this case, East US. Then we're going to pin it to the dashboard and click create. Now what this is going to do, it's going to set up a resource group with a web app, an app service plan, and an application insights object. And once this deployment is finished, let's then have a look and see what items are created in the resource group. We can see that our resource group has been created successfully, test web monitor. And inside this resource group, we have an application insights object and a web app object. So let's have a look and see the application insights area. So exactly the same as before. It's no different to when we tie it to a functions app. We can literally specify the setup on startup. So if I didn't have this application insights object set up already, I can simply jump back into the web app and set it up all through the web app in only a few clicks. So then we get the dashboard screen, which will show total server requests, failures, and a couple of other telemetry items that we regularly monitor by default. So obviously there's no data in here, so there's no graphing shown at this point in time. But that's how we set up tracking on our web application. Now let's turn attention to the mobile application side of things. What I'm going to show you is the back-end architecture for an application known as Hunt. This can be downloaded from GitHub today. Now what Hunt is a game built on cognitive services which basically allows you to play a virtual scavenger hunt application with multiple users across anywhere in the world. But what I want you to focus on here is not what's happening on the client app. I want you to focus on the backend. So this is what the backend architecture to Hunt looks like on Azure. Now please turn attention to the central item here, which is the Functions app. And then have a look at the top of the screen where we've got the app insights. So like we showed before, we went through how we set up a Functions app with application insights. Very simple. So inside a mobile application, you should think about this type of technique for tracking telemetry on the back end of a mobile app. So when we're setting up serverless backends to our mobile application, we have the option to set up application insights to track how the backend architecture and request tracking of a mobile app is happening and how it's performing. and it allows us to determine any issues that may occur in the back end of a mobile app. So like we saw before when we set up a web app, if we wanted to monitor telemetry on a mobile app, we set it up the exact same way. We tie in the application insights object on setup and create it in a resource group like we saw before. Now we're going to have a look at a serverless concept for tracking telemetry inside a functions app. What you're seeing here is code taken from a functions project inside Visual Studio built on C#. This code is deployed directly into a functions app through a DLL, and each function of that app is bound to these functions inside the project. So what we can see here is inside the run function, we are containing the entire executable code for this function call inside a request telemetry context. What the analytics service does, we don't actually need to see the code. I'm just going to talk about what it does. What it does is take a new request telemetry, set up an operation context for the code to be run inside the using statement. So what it'll do is it will take that new request telemetry, say start operation, run all the code inside the try catch block, and then stop the operation. So basically what this is doing is tracking exactly what happens through that entire execution of code for this particular function. And we can track the entire request telemetry, what is happening, the performance, even track exceptions when they do occur inside this function call. So you can see here how in detail we can get for every single call made in the functions app, how it is performing on the back end. Now we're going to turn attention to how we monitor track events on the actual mobile client. So this is App Center. App Center is what we use today for DevOps and monitoring analytics and crashes inside one portal. It's a new tool released by Microsoft and it is absolutely outstanding. So let's have a look how we actually track crashes and exceptions and usage on the mobile app. Now, the first section is App Center crashes. So we can set up App Center inside any mobile application to record any exceptions that may occur throughout the code. And what you're seeing here on the right in the screenshot is the list of all the exceptions that have occurred, the number of times that particular exception has occurred, the user that has actually experienced this exception, what version of the app it was, and whether the status is open or closed. By that I mean whether it has been fixed or not. And we can see the last time that exception did occur. Now there's also App Center Analytics. App Center Analytics has quite a few different areas which is used to track the usage and monitoring of a mobile application. Now what we have on the overview screen, which you'll see in a second, is a summary of user sessions, geo-regions, devices that have used the application. It's a really cool screen for getting a quick summary of who, what device, where the device was running the application in one screen. Then we have another section which is custom events. So like you saw in that serverless technique for our back end on the mobile application, we can do a similar scenario on the front end and track an event for a particular section of code. We can then also look at a log flow screen. All this is in App Center, which you'll see in the demo at the end of this slide, of basically all the incoming logs in real time, what's happening throughout the entire blocks of code. Then, what is even more great about App Center is we can export all this front-end analytics directly back into application insights. This is where Microsoft tools are very powerful for that full-scale integration between back and front end. Now having a look at this screen, what you can see is basically a summary of one of the apps in App Center inside the analytics section. Now what we're getting here is like an audience overview, how many people have used the app, sort of the duration they've used the application. On the right, we've got the top devices that have used the application, sort of the top 5 devices that have downloaded the application and used it. Then we've got languages down the bottom, countries where people are using the application. It's a really good overview of sort of how the app is tracking with its users. Inside this analytics section of App Center, we also have event metrics. Now, the event metrics can be tracked to pages, can be tracked to any sort of sections of code where we want to track any sort of telemetry. So you can see on the screenshot here, we can see the type of events. So in this case, we're loading pages and calling the track event function call of the analytics object inside the mobile app client. We will see this in a demo at the end on how we do this. Breadcrumbs. Who's ever heard of this before? Have you ever had an exception inside an application and wondered what the steps were to produce that exception? That's what breadcrumbs are. So when we start logging crashes and logging events inside our application through App Center, we can see all those log events that led up to an exception occurring. We then have log flow. Now this section is really useful. What log flow does is it collects and displays incoming data from a current day in UTC time. The data will appear within seconds and sent by the device to the log flow page of App Center. So you can see in the screenshot the events it's listening to and basically the telemetry that's coming from that device. You can see exactly what time it occurred and where this crash did occur. So this is the breadcrumbs sort of area where we can see those leading events that did occur prior to an exception or app crash. So you can see exactly how to reproduce an exception. Really useful stuff when a major bug occurs with sort of thousands of users and you need to track that bug very fast. Now let's have a look at how we set up this App Center tracking and analytics inside our mobile application. This is the app.cs.xaml.cs file, which is the starting point of any Xamarin Forms application. Now inside the constructor, we're calling mobilecenter.start and passing in 2 GUID items, which are mapped to our projects for Android and iOS inside App Center. So let's have a look inside App Center where we get this GUID from. So here we've got gallery3.android and gallery3.iOS on the apps page of App Center. And you can see all my applications, both Android and iOS. We can even do Windows, we can do React Native, we can do UWP, we can do native iOS and Android. App Center is fantastic. But let's jump into the iOS project of this Gallery 3 example and scroll down, and here we can see the GUID of this project. So if we were doing a Xamarin traditional application, we would simply call appcenter.start and only specify the iOS GUID instead of both the Android and iOS GUID. But because this is a Xamarin Forms application, we are specifying both projects because we want the telemetry to track inside both projects on App Center. So we've also set inside the start function that I want to start tracking analytics and crashes. And this comes from these libraries up the top here. These all can be imported inside a NuGet package, and even in the native applications, if we were doing native iOS and Swift, they all come in packaged items that we can import directly into the project. So let's turn attention to the onStart method of this Xamarin Forms application, and we're going to enable both analytics and crashes as soon as that application starts. That's it. And now we've got tracking for analytics and crashes inside App Center for this mobile application. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump in and I'm going to have a look at the crashes section for this app. And here we're seeing basically one crash that did occur previously 1 week ago for the iOS application of this Gallery 3 sample. Now if I want to jump in and see this in more detail, I'm going to see the stack trace of this exception. And here we're seeing the page and the function which caused the exception. So I can jump back straight into the code. And there's the album page. And look at the code and find the problem where it did occur. But because I'm so good, I've already taken this exception out previously because App Center found this crash a week ago. So I was able to fix the problem a week ago. But let's have a look at another section here inside our code, which is the analytics.track event. So this is the function called when we want to start mapping event tracking to App Center. So we can choose to simply specify just the name of the event we want to track like this, or we can pass parameters to the event we're tracking like this in a dictionary. So because in this case we're talking about an album page here, I'm going to track the name and title of that album for every single time I tap on an item in the list. So let's go ahead and let's run this application. Just have a look and see what it actually is doing. And I'll show you exactly how this event is being tracked and pushed back into App Center. While that's loading and building our mobile device, I'm going to jump into the analytics section of App Center. And in the events section, well, first let's start off with the overview, because we haven't seen the overview page yet. So this is the overview page, and we're seeing basically a summary of active users, daily sessions, top devices, languages, countries, active devices per version. All this is a summary, and it's really, really good because we have the ability, because these are kind of interactive graphs as well. So we can kind of slide along here and see monthly, weekly, daily statistics. It's really, really useful. And on the same bar graphs, the line charts, we're seeing all interactive usage. Now I'm going to jump into the events section now and have a look at the events that are being tracked for this app. As you can see here, these are all the custom events I've specified in our mobile app to track in App Center. So while this is building on the iOS simulator, let's bring up the iOS simulator. And let's look at how we track an album item tapped event on the album page. It's taking a little bit of time here, so while that's going on, I'm going to jump back into App Center, and I'm going to click on an event that did occur and have a look at it in more detail. So this is where the statistics that are being pulled back into App Center get really, really fine. You're looking at specific users that have called the event. The count. Oh, here we go. The application's starting to run. And what we're going to do is we're simply going to pull down some images and display them in a list. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on one of those list items. Great, a tree. Very simple mobile application, but we're keeping this example very simple. Now if we jump back into the events section, probably take a few seconds to come up, but you will see that event appear on this events page. So let's just jump back into an album clicked event. And here you'll see the items that have happened by users per session in the last 30 days. So this is where things can get really fine and how we want to trace breadcrumbs when exceptions do occur. Go onto the left panel and click on the settings item. Scroll down to the export item down here and click on new export. And here are some options that we can actually export all this data of this iOS app in App Center out to in Azure. We can export all the data to blob storage or into application insights. So you can see how this integration between App Center and application insights becomes very useful. Thanks for watching.